Hi y'all, Dan here. Thanks for joining me. Before getting the GoPro, what I had used was a DJI Pocket, Osmo Pocket. In fact, that's the camera that I'm shooting this video on today, and I'd forgotten how much I really liked that camera, and still do. It's very smooth. It provides a very good picture. It's got fairly good audio. It's really a good little camera. It's extremely lightweight. The gimbal is fairly delicate. And so I had it out on one of my hikes when I went to Burkhead Mountain, and I had tweaked the gimbal, and it just stopped working. And I'd sent it into DJI, and they were wonderful. And they fixed it for me with no cost, no charge, sent it back to me, and it has worked great ever since. But I just don't want to damage the camera, so I'm sort of particular on where I use it. But the GoPro is a very rugged little camera. It's designed as an action camera, and so I've never had any problem with it when I've had it out on the trail. Now, what I didn't like about this camera was two things. One, when I first got it and first took it out of the box, it would turn off. It would just turn off in the middle of a video, and I was so frustrated with it. And then also the quality of the video just wasn't very good. My Osmo Pocket was so much better than the quality out of here. And I was really ready to send this back and say, no, thank you, I'm not going to use this. But I started watching some videos and learning about two things on the settings. One was it came to me from the factory, and I don't know if all of them come this way, but I would check it if I were you. It came to me set to snooze after 8 minutes. Well, I would have thought that it would not snooze while you're actively using it, but apparently it does. So I turned the snooze off of it, and I never had that problem again. But then the other problem was that the quality of the video. So I started looking at the settings. And this is where the power of this little camera comes into play. It has a number of settings, presets they call them, that you can tailor to the types of videos that you're shooting. Let me just go through these, and I'll put this up on the screen so you can see the settings. But the first setting is indoor, and I use this when I'm teaching classes. I use the GoPro now to video the classes that I teach and put online. Also, if you're doing a gear review in your hotel room, or a gear review in your house, or if you're doing some kind of video from inside, this indoor is pretty good. You can do 4K 24 as far as your resolution in frames per second. I keep it to a linear lens, and then I turn the HyperSmooth on high. That really keeps it from bouncing around and stabilizes the video. You don't have an option for low light, and you don't have an option for zoom, and I keep the clips off. Then there's a thing called PROTUNE, and for the PROTUNE, I keep the bit rate high. That just creates more data. It uses up more card space, but it adds more data to your videos. On the shutter, I keep it at auto for indoors. The EV comp, I turn that down to a -0.5. And then for white balance, I keep it auto. For ISO minimum, I keep it at 100. ISO maximum, I keep it at 400. Anything over 800, I see that the videos start to get a little grainy and a little noisy, and so I don't like that, so I turn it off. For sharpness, I find that high is too sharp and low is not sharp enough. If you were really doing a lot of editing, video editing, after you're in post-edit, keeping that at low would probably be good, because you can add your own sharpness. The same way with color. I keep mine on GoPro, but if you were doing a lot of post-editing, you might want to turn that to flat so that you could add the coloring in for yourself. I keep audio at raw because I find that the internal microphones are fine for me. Turn the wind to auto because on indoors you typically don't have that problem. And then there's shortcuts, and these shortcuts give you little buttons at the bottom of the screen so that you can change them as you're setting it up for your video. Lower left, I put that at lens so I can change it from narrow, or from change the lens from linear to wide, which gives you that fisheye effect, which I don't really like on most videos. And so I keep it at linear there. And then upper left, I have that for slow-mo. If I want to slow the video down, I can just touch that, and that slows it down to slow-mo. And that's my indoor setting. For POV, I use a 2.7 60 frame per second resolution. The lens I put into SuperView, which gives you an extra high wide lens. You do get the fisheye effect, but it also sort of gives you the idea that you're there and you're seeing what I'm seeing. So for POV, or point of view, I want you to see as much of what it looks like to me as possible. I put the HyperSmooth on boost because I really want to not have the bouncing in the video. So boost does an amazing job. And then for PROTUNEs, I put the bit rate at high, I put the shutter at auto, and I drop the EV down to a -1. And then I also adjust the white balance to 55K, 5500K. And that's if the sun is out. If it's super bright, I might pull it on up to 65. ISO minimum is 100, maximum is 400. I keep the sharpness to medium and color to GoPro. Wind is auto, and that way it has its own algorithms that if the wind starts kicking up, it'll try to mute the wind for you. Shortcuts on the left, lower left, I have that at lens. Lower right is zoom, so that I can zoom in if I want to. Upper left is slow-mo, and then upper right is HyperSmooth. For my trail, now this is one of the preset that I put in here after watching several videos on. There wasn't one especially for trails, but there was some for snowboarding and for mountain biking and for different things. So I tried to take the examples that I saw in different videos, and I sort of consolidated them to create a trail video setting for myself. I've used 4K resolution, 24 frames per second. Keep the lens to wide. The HyperSmooth is on boost. Clips is off. And then for my PROTUNEs, the bit rate is high. The shutter is auto. EV compensation is a -0.5. White balance is at 55K. ISO minimum, maximum is 100 and 400 respectively. Sharpness again is at medium, and color is at GoPro, because I don't do a lot of post coloring on any of my videos. I'm not that talented at it. Shortcuts, I keep the lower left at white balance, lower right is off, upper left and upper right are all off. So I only control the white balance if the sun is super bright, or if the shadows are there, then I can adjust the white balance and get better coverage on the video. And that's my trail settings. There's a standard setting, and the standard is sort of what if I turn the camera around to myself, I put it on standard. I use 4K resolution and 60 frames per second here, so that if I want to slow it down, I can do slow-mo in here. I use a linear lens. HyperSmooth is on. Clips is off. For my PROTUNEs, I use a high bit rate. Auto on the shutter, a -1 on EV compensation. White balance I used to put to auto for this. ISO minimum and maximum is a 100 and 400 respectfully. Sharpness is at medium, color is GoPro, raw audio is off, and I put the wind on auto. For the shortcuts, in my lower left I use the shutter for that. Lower right is white balance, upper left is the lens, and upper right is HyperSmooth. For my activity settings, this is if I'm climbing up a rock scramble or going to run someplace or do something that's, doing a lot of motion. I use a 4K 24 resolution in frames per second, wide lens, put the HyperSmooth to boost, turn the clips off, and then in PROTUNEs, I have the bit rate at high, the shutter speed is at auto, EV compensation is a negative 0.5. Put the white balance here to 5500K. ISO minimum is 100, but I don't want to get the noise in the video, so I don't go over 800 ever. Sharpness, I use medium, color is GoPro, raw audio is high, wind is off. For my shortcuts, the lower left is the shutter, lower right is white balance, upper left is the lens, and upper right is HyperSmooth. The one I really enjoy is cinematic, and this is when I'm panning just a beautiful scenery so that you can see just the beauties of creation. And here I've got the resolution and frames per second at 4K and 24. Lens is at linear to take out the fisheye effect. Put the HyperSmooth to boost to reduce the any kind of shaking in the video, keeping it smooth. And then clips are off. For my PROTUNE settings, the bit rate is high, the shutter is at auto, EV compensation again is at a negative 0.5. Put the white balance to 5000K. ISO minimum and maximum are 100 and 400. Sharpness is medium, color is GoPro, raw audio is off, and the wind is on auto. For the shortcuts, my lower left is the lens, the lower right is Slo-Mo, the lower right is zoom, and then the upper left is Slo-Mo, upper right is smooth. Those are my cinematic settings. The final video setting that I have is on Slo-Mo, and here I use a 2.7K 120 frame per second resolution and speed. HyperSmooth is on, clips are off. PROTUNEs, the bit rate is high, the shutter is at auto, the EV compensation is a negative 5, white balance is at 5500K. ISO minimum and maximum are 100 and 400 respectfully. Sharpness is on medium, color is on GoPro, raw audio is off, and then the wind is at auto. My shortcuts, I just turn them all off on this setting. That's for Slo-Mo. I said that's the last of the videos, but there's another thing that I use here, and that's called time lapse. So let me just go through the time lapse a little bit. For your night lapse, which is when I shoot and let the moon, either go down or come up, the stars come out. If I'm trying to do this, it's very challenging on this little camera, but this is what has seemed to work best for me. I put the lens on wide because I'm trying to get as much as I can, and then I put the interval on auto because this way the camera does a good job of deciding what the intervals are here. The format, I use photo. Now you can use video. In video, the GoPro will make you a video automatically. And I've done that, but I don't get the crispness and the sharpness that I do when it's in the photo mode. And in the photo, it's like if you've taken individual pictures and you sort of flip them together, and you can sort of create a video that way, a little movie. That's what the camera does for you. The output is on standard. Shutter speed is 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds, it's going to take a picture. The zoom is at 1. White balance here, I've got it at 32K. That's to get as much of the night light in and as blue as I can get it. ISO minimum is at 200, and ISO maximum is at 800. Sharpness is at medium. Color is GoPro. The shortcuts for this, I do put some shortcuts in here. The lower left is the lens, the lower right is the zoom, and then I turn the upper left and upper right off. Those are my night lapse settings. Then there's a time lapse, and so if I want to just in the daytime sort of get the clouds, these are my settings for time lapse. 4K resolution. It's a wide lens. It's 0.5 seconds interval, and then I put it in a video format because it seems to work very well during the daylight. EV compensation I put to the negative 0.5. White balance is auto here, and then my ISO minimum and maximums are back to 100 and 400. Sharpness is at medium, and color is GoPro. Here my shortcuts is just for the lower left and lower right. I use the lower left as lens, the lower right is zoom, and I turn the others off. The final thing we have is time warp. And time warp is when sort of you're speed walking. It speeds up everything around you. So this is a cool effect if you want to use it and test it out sometime. But the resolution here, you keep it at 4K. I use the lens at wide, and the speed is auto. For PROTUNEs, my EV compensation is at negative 0.5. Auto, white balance, ISO minimum and maximum this time is 100 and 800. Sharpness is at medium, and then my color is at GoPro. And here, my lower left shortcut is the lens, the lower right shortcut is the zoom, and upper left, upper right are off. The mode button I use is a highlight, so that I can highlight different parts of the video as I go along. Those are all of my settings. So then, how do I use them? Well, let's look at that in the next video.